Hello everybody. So today I'm here with a short explanation on the chapter The Interview, which is written by Christopher Sylvester. Now we come to what is an interview. So interview is basically a one-on-one conversation between an interviewer and an interviewee. And what is the purpose of an interviewer? The interviewer always asks questions and interviewee gives information through his or her answers. So there are many kinds of interviews. You have the celebrity interviews, given by celebrity, or you have interviews given by witnesses, and you have interviews when you go for job interviews. Now, the main purpose of an interview is to gain information. Now, this chapter, an interview, is divided into two parts. So the first part of the story is all about the reaction and views of celebrities towards an interview. So most of the famous personalities, have negative interviews, and at the same time there are positive views of the interview also. Now, this particular chapter has the theme of how the freedom of the press can curtail an individual's privacy, but at the same time, how these interviews can also boost the career of a person, in their professional lives. Now, the second part is the interview between Umberto Eco, so he is an Italian professor, and then the other one is Professor Mukund. Okay, so he was an editor of the Hindu between March 2016 and 2019. Okay, now like I said, there are positive views as well as negative views. So first of all, let's do about the positive views. Now, some of them think that this is a medium of communication, a supreme serviceable medium of communication. Now, this is also a very immense popular style of journalists. They use this in their journalism, and also we get a lot of information through these interviews. So it's also said that the interviewer, whoever is doing the interview, he holds a position of an extraordinary power influence. Moreover, that this is an art. Some of them, they say this is an art because through interviews you get a lot of truth. So this is also a source of truth and information. We already talked about the positive views. Now, some people, they're not comfortable with interviews. Now, there is also a myth about photography. Like, today we think it's really cool to take photographs and put it on a profile page and all. But there was a time when people did not feel comfortable. Okay, so they did not want to take photograph because they felt that it was like stealing their soul or somebody's soul. So nobody wanted to take photograph. And that's how even some of the writers, some of the celebrities, they see themselves as victims. They despise the interview and they call it as an unwarranted intrusion into their lives, because they feel that somehow they feel diminished. They don't feel good. Now, like here, V.S. Naipaul, he was one of the most popular writers, and according to him, he feels that some of the people gets wounded because of an interview, as his privacy is intruded upon and it is given to the public. It's like kind of bearing up everything before the public to see. And also, because of the interview, the person loses a part of himself. So he never wanted to be interviewed, and he has a very negative view about interviews. Next is Lewis Carroll, and he is also an English author, writer, and he's most known for the book called Alice in Wonderland, which we've already read. So he never liked to be interviewed. Okay, because he felt there was a horror. It was a horror of being lionized. Lionized meaning, to give a lot of public attention, to be treated as a celebrity, which he never wanted. Now, the next writer is Rudyard Kipling. He considers it as a crime, and he also feels, he believes, in fact, that this crime should have a punishment. Okay, so as much as any other people, any other criminals, so people who take interview should also be punished. He finds it disrespectful. And yet, he himself perpetrated such an assault on Mark Twain only a few years before. Okay, so next one is H.G. Wells. He is also a big writer, and he finds giving interview is tough. Okay, and he refers to his interviewing ordeal. So ordeal means difficulties. But then again, yet after 40 years, he himself interviews Joseph Stalin. So you can get a glimpse that people, when they are interviewed, they hate it, they do not like to be interviewed. But when it's their turn to interview others, then they're happy about it. Okay, so the next one is Saul Bellow, and he feels that interview is kind of thumbprint on his windpipe, as if somebody is like, literally putting kind of strangling him, holding him on his throat and strangling him. So he finds interview very, very suffocating. Now that is the part one. Like I said, we have the positive side and the negative side. So I already told you that, this is the source of truth. It is considered as an art. It is a medium of communication, source of information, and unprecedented power and influence held by the interviewer, and it also gives a lot of popularity and spotlight to the one who is giving the interview. Now, negative part, we already talked about all these, and also the different celebrities and writers, especially here I've just we were just talking about the writers, so how they feel. Okay, part 2 is an extract from an interview of Professor Umberto Eco, who is the author of a popular novel called The Name of the Rose, and he's being interviewed by Mukund Padmanabhan. Okay, so at that particular time he was a journalist at the Hindu. So Professor Umberto, he is Italian and he's written a lot of books, but more so ever, he's a philosopher, he's a medievalist, he's a semiotician, a novelist, cultural critic, political and social commentator, a professor who spent a lot of time giving lectures at universities and also writing books on academics more than, novels. So, but then he is best known for the novel called The Name of the Rose, which is a historical mystery combining semiotics and fiction with biblical analysis. So it also has medieval studies and literary theory. Now, Professor Mukund Padmanabhan was the editor of the Hindu between March 2016 to the end of February 2019. So previously he was the editor of the Hindu business line, and he also holds an MPhil in philosophy and has worked briefly as a lecturer at the University of Delhi before switching on to journalism. So he's interested in and has written about politics, about legal affairs and literature. So before joining the Hindu group in 1997, he had also worked with Sunday Magazine in Kolkata and the Indian Express in Chennai. This interview has mainly 5 questions. So the first question that Mukund Padmanabhan poses to Professor Umberto is, how can one man do all the things together? So as an answer, he says, maybe this is just the impression of other people. They think that I'm just one man and I'm doing a lot of things, but he says, I'm doing the same thing. So he explains, he is just pursuing philosophical interest through novels of academic writings. Okay, so he's just had one interest, and that's what he is being. And then he also adds that he has some kind of secret to his success, and that is the use of interstices. These interstices are nothing but empty spaces. And he also gives an example. For example, he is there waiting, okay, for the interviewer, that is Professor Mukund, to come and meet him. So the moment the interviewer, or let's say the journalist, he's getting into an elevator, climbing up and getting into the room, and the professor in his room waiting for him. So that is the space between that, the distance between that, that is the empty space. That is called interstices. And this is where Professor Umberto takes advantage of. He uses the space, instead of just sitting on the sofa and waiting for the journalist to come and interview him, he uses this particular space to do his work. Okay. Now the second question that is posed to him is his informal style of writing. So whether it is his academics books or it's his novels that he writes, the non-academic books, there is the similar style of informal writing. Then Professor Umberto, he begins telling about how he adapted this style, So first, when he had to submit his doctoral dissertation in Italy, so one of the professors said that scholars learn a lot of certain subjects, okay, then they make a lot of false hypotheses, then they correct them, and at the end they put only the conclusions, they leave out all the part that they worked. But on the contrary, Professor Umberto had told the story of his research, including all the trials, the errors, the methods. So everything was included here. Now, this was different from what the others did. And hence, the professor recognized it and also published his dissertation as a book. Okay, so at that particular time, he was just 22 years old. So he understood that scholarly books should be written the same way as he wrote the other books, the novels and all, to tell the story of the research. And that's how he took this style of telling stories, of informal writing, even when he started writing his books of academics. Now, the third question was about, he has already written 5 novels, but he has written over 40 scholarly books or academic books, and yet people call him a novelist. So does that bother him? And to his answer, he says yes, because he's been a professor. He goes for academic conferences. He gives lecture. He does not attend pen clubs and all. But then he goes to universities, he does a lot of research, he writes a lot of scholarly books, and yet people know him not for his scholarly achievements, but for his novels. So, but then he's fine with it. So the fourth question. The fourth question is about, the novel seems to be very serious. It's quite complex. It has detective yarn, it has metaphysics, it has theology and medieval history. So, but then still, even after being so complex, it had become quite a big hit. And then Mukund, he asks Professor Umberto if this was really surprising for him, or was he puzzled, was he confused when his novel sold like hotcakes. So to his answer, Professor Umberto says, no, he was not surprised. He was not confused at all. So the journalists, the publishers, they might have been quite confused, but not him, because he knew there were few people on this earth, especially in the country, who loved complex things rather than the most simple, romantic stories or any other very simple stories. There were some of the people who liked complex things. And he himself, he says, when I am at home, I watch television. I don't keep on watching Miami Vice, or I don't keep on watching Emergency Room. I enjoy it, but at the same time, I need a lot of other things. I watch it only for some time, not the entire day. So I do want change from the mundane routine. Okay, so likewise, even there, let's say there are uh, uh, around 6 billion people on this planet. But this particular book, it sold only between 10 to 15 million copies. So in a way, you could say that it reached just a small amount of people. And it is exactly these small amount of people who wanted to read his novel. So therefore, it was not very surprising. And finally, he comes to the last question. And the last question is about, could this particular success be due to the mention of medieval history? And as his answer, professor says, yeah, maybe it could be. Okay, and he feels that maybe that it is possible. His American publisher also did not expect the novel to sell more than 3,000 copies. Okay, in a country where people had not seen cathedrals, where people did not know about Latin, but it did sell between 2 to 3 million copies. So it's a mystery. And he does not understand about it. So he feels that the novel wouldn't have been so well received had it been written 10 years earlier or maybe 10 years later. Perhaps the appropriateness of the time, the period it was written, could be the reason. So it could be anything. So as we go through the extract, we can easily note that Professor Umberto Eco does not think interview is a crime or an offense. He interacts properly and modestly. So just like in the first part, how, people have both the positive and the negative views about interview. Some of them, they receive it very positively. And in fact, the one who takes the interview, the person holds a lot of power, and the one who's being interviewed also gets a lot of popularity. He or she gets into the spotlight. And in fact, it is through interviews that we receive a lot of information about our contemporaries. We know about our idols. Okay, at the same time, it's a source of truth, and it's also an art. Now, at the same time, again, there are people, I told you, there are a school of people like V.S. Naipaul, Lewis Carroll, Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, Saul Bellow, who think that interview is bad. Some of them, they feel it's an unwarranted intrusion into their private life. Some of them, they feel it diminishes people. Okay, some of them feel wounded. Some of them describe interviews as being thumbprints on their windpipe. So some of them consider it as a crime. But then, if you see again on the other side, if these people who have a very negative view about the interview, they themselves, if they have to interview others, then they willingly do it. Okay, so that's how the chapter concludes.